I never thought my life would turn into a story worth sharing on the internet, let alone one filled with betrayal, revenge, and secrets so dark they nearly destroyed me. But sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and more painful than any nightmare you could ever imagine. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Mary, I'm 27 years old, and for the longest time I believed I had the perfect family. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, raised by a mother who worked as a school secretary and a father who managed a hardware store. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. My parents always told me they were saving for my future, setting money aside so I could go to college and live a better life. I was the only daughter but not the only child. I had a younger brother, Michael. Michael was the golden boy. He was charismatic, athletic, the kind of kid people couldn't help but love. He got into trouble a lot, but Mom always brushed it off with a laugh, saying, "Boys will be boys." Me. I was the responsible one. The careful one. The girl who stayed home, studied hard, and dreamed of becoming a lawyer one day. My mom used to tell me, "Mary, you'll make this family proud. You'll be the first to graduate college." And I believed her. That's why I worked so hard in high school, why I spent sleepless nights preparing for exams, and why I stayed out of the drama most teenagers fell into. My mom said she was putting money into a college fund for me. Every paycheck a little bit more. And every time she said it, I felt a little safer, like my future was being carefully built brick by brick. By the time I turned 18, I had acceptance letters from several universities. I remember holding those letters in my hands, feeling like the world was finally opening up for me. But what I didn't know then was that the very people I trusted most were about to destroy me. It started subtly. When Michael turned 18, the same year I graduated high school, my mom and dad bought him a brand new car. Nothing too fancy, but brand new, shining red paint, leather seats, and that intoxicating new car smell. I remember watching him pull into the driveway, grinning ear to ear and asking, "Where did the money come from?" My mom just waved her hand. "We've been saving. It's his graduation gift." Something inside me stung, but I pushed it down. I figured maybe they had separate savings for us, or maybe they had more money than I thought. But then came the shock. When I asked about accessing my college fund, my mom went quiet. Too quiet. She looked at me, then at my dad, and said, "We'll talk about it later." Later never came. Instead, when I pressed again, she finally confessed, "We gave that money to Michael. He needed it more than you did." I swear I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my ears rang, and my world tilted on its axis. "What?" I choked out. "That was my college fund. You promised me." Her response? Cold, dismissive. "Mary, you're smart. You'll get scholarships, grants. Michael doesn't have that kind of opportunity." We had to make a choice. A choice. And they chose him. I wish I could say I walked away that day and never looked back, but the truth is, I tried to forgive them. I told myself maybe they were right, maybe I could figure things out. I worked 2 jobs, applied for every scholarship under the sun, and somehow managed to scrape together enough to start at a local community college. But the bitterness, it never left me. Years later, I thought I'd finally escaped the chaos of my family when I married my husband, Daniel. He was kind, hardworking, and most importantly, he made me feel seen in a way my parents never had. But marriage didn't erase my family ties. Every holiday, every birthday, every gathering, we were expected at my mother's house. And every single time, I watched as Michael was paraded around like the golden child, while I was treated like the invisible one. The car was just the beginning. My parents helped him with rent, paid for his vacations, and even helped him start a small business. Me. I was told, "You're strong. You don't need our help." I kept swallowing my resentment. For years. Until one night everything changed. It was a rainy evening and I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off some paperwork. My mom wasn't home, but I needed to use the bathroom, so I went upstairs. That's when I noticed it. Her office door was slightly open. Inside, her desk was covered in papers, receipts, and a bank statement. At first, I didn't think much of it. But when I saw the balance, my jaw dropped. Tens of thousands of dollars. Sitting there. Untouched. I froze. My heart pounded. If my family had been so broke that they couldn't afford my college fund, then how did my mom have a secret account filled with money? I didn't know it then, but that moment was the spark that lit the fire. Because what I was about to discover would change everything. I couldn't stop staring at those numbers on the bank statement. Tens of thousands of dollars. Enough to pay for my entire college degree. And then some. And yet my mom had looked me in the eye years ago and told me there was no money left. That she had no choice but to give everything to Michael. I remember whispering out loud in that empty room, "You lied to me." My hands were shaking as I flipped through the papers on her desk. More receipts. More statements. Transfers from accounts I didn't even know she had. And the strangest thing? Some of the withdrawals weren't even in her name. They were in the name of a man I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. Who was he? And why was my mom funneling money to him? That night when my mom came home I tried to play it cool. I didn't want to tip her off that I had seen her bank statements, so I asked casual questions over dinner. "So, how are things financially? You and Dad doing okay?" He stiffened. "Why are you asking?" "No reason. Just curious. You know, especially since I've been struggling with tuition." Her eyes flickered and for the briefest moment I saw it, guilt. Then she plastered on her usual fake smile. "Mary, we've done everything we can for you. You know that." I wanted to scream. Instead I bit my tongue and said nothing. But inside the anger was boiling. A week later I got a phone call from someone I never expected. My Aunt Linda, my mom's estranged sister. "Mary," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to talk. It's about your mother." We met at a little diner outside of town. I slid into the booth across from her, my heart pounding. "What's going on?" I asked. Aunt Linda sighed, stirring her coffee. "Your mother. She's been lying to everyone for years. That money you think went to Michael? It didn't." I froze. "What do you mean it didn't?" "She gave him some help, sure. But most of it? She's been giving it to her boyfriend." My blood ran cold. "Her what?" Aunt Linda nodded grimly. "She's been having an affair for years. The account she opened? Is not just for her. It's for him. She's been funding his lifestyle. His trips. His debts. Everything." I felt the room spin. The betrayal was worse than I ever imagined. Not only had my mom stolen my future, she had stolen it to build a secret life with another man. I didn't want to believe it, but Aunt Linda slid a folder across the table. "I thought you should see this." Inside were photos. My mother arm in arm with a man at a hotel. Receipts for luxury restaurants, jewelry purchases, vacations. All paid for with money that was supposed to be mine. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Every picture was like a knife to the gut. "How long?" I whispered. "Over 10 years, Aunt Linda said softly. "Your father doesn't know. At least not yet." 10 years. That meant the affair started while I was still in high school. While I was staying up late, studying, dreaming about a future she swore she was saving for. She was siphoning away everything to keep her dirty secret. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. The next Sunday during a family dinner I confronted her. Everyone was there. My dad, Michael, my husband Daniel. The table was filled with food, laughter, the usual performance my mom loved to put on. But I couldn't fake it anymore. I slammed the folder of evidence onto the table. The laughter died instantly. "What's this?" my mom snapped, her eyes narrowing. "You tell me," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been living a double life. It looks like you stole my college fund to pay for your affair." The room went silent. My dad's fork clattered to his plate. Michael stared at me wide-eyed. My mom's face drained of color. "Where did you get this? That's your response?" I shouted. Not denial. Not an explanation. Just panic about getting caught. My dad grabbed the folder, flipping through the photos. His hands trembled. "Is this true?" he whispered. My mom stammered. It's not what it looks like." "Don't you dare," I cut her off. "Don't you dare lie again. You ruined my future. You made me feel worthless. And all this time, you were funding your little secret life while I worked myself to the bone just to stay in school." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. For the first time I saw fear in her eyes. My dad stood up, shaking with anger. "How long?" he demanded. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "How long, Anna?" he roared. Finally she whispered, 10 years. The silence that followed was deafening. My dad left the table without another word. Michael stormed out, muttering curses. My husband squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes filled with silent support. Me. I sat there staring at the woman who had betrayed us all. You thought you could bury this forever, I said coldly. But guess what, Mom? I'm done being your scapegoat. I'm done being invisible. And I promise you, you're going to regret underestimating me. She tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. And what are you going to do, Mary? Ruin your own family? I leaned forward, my voice like steel. No. I'm going to ruin yours. That was the night everything changed. That was the night I stopped being the victim and started planning my revenge. After that dinner, the house felt like a set where I'd been living the wrong role my whole life. Everything familiar was suddenly foreign. My mother's laugh, the way Dad rinsed his coffee mug, the quiet thrum of the refrigerator. Every ordinary sound took on an edge, like a stage cue in the moment before disaster. I went to the guest room and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed until the world stopped spinning. My hands were ink-smudged from that folder. My fingers still trembled from slamming it on the table. All of the old reassurances my mother had given me, "We're saving for you, honey," turned into a loop of lies. It felt like someone had sawn out a piece of my history and left a gap shaped like betrayal. I cried. I screamed into a pillow. I paced until my knees hurt. And then, when the storm in my chest settled into something harder, purpose, I opened my laptop and started writing down everything I knew. You don't go from sobbing to planning in a single graceful arc. It's messy. In those first days I was all over the place. I wanted to tell everyone, I wanted to burn the house down, I wanted to forgive and forget. Emotions were loud and contradictory. I cried at the grocery store because I saw a college sweatshirt and remembered all the nights I'd wished on scholarships. I laughed bitterly at tiny things. A receipt from a boutique found in Mom's drawer suddenly read like evidence in a play. What steadied me was a simple, cold thought. Anger without direction is useless. If I wanted anything, whether it was restitution, apology, or just the truth acknowledged, I had to shape that anger into something practical. I had to be smarter than my mother had been. So I made a list. You need people who are quiet and competent when you're planning something like this. I thought of a dozen people I could go to and then crossed out all but 3. Lena. My best friend since middle school. Calm, fierce, and nobody's fool. She'd help me organize, be a second pair of eyes, and most importantly, keep a secret. Marcus. An old college friend who worked in payroll at a mid-size firm. He wasn't a hacker or anything shady. He was just good with numbers and could explain banking terms without making me feel stupid. He offered practical advice about how to document money trails in a way an attorney would understand. Erin, the editor of a local independent paper I'd once interviewed for a college project. I didn't go to her to leak things, at least not at first, but to understand how a journalist verifies facts. She told me one thing that became a mantra. We won't publish a rumor. We'll publish proof. If you bring us documents that check out, people will have to pay attention. I told each of them different things. With Lena I was raw and messy. With Marcus I was practical and data-driven. With Erin I was cautious and procedural. The circle was small and tight and that felt safe. A dossier sounds dramatic and it is. But in practice it's a boring, meticulous thing. Scanning documents, dating receipts, cross-referencing transactions, noting who was present at which event. I turned our kitchen table into a war room for a few nights. Receipts, invoices, photocopies, color-coded sticky notes. I faced my first moral question. What to do with things I found that weren't strictly evidence of monetary diversion but suggested deception. Like a hotel receipt with a man's name I didn't recognize, or a bouquet delivery card tucked behind a photograph. Were those private things? Did they prove wrongdoing? Or were they just private indiscretions? I wrote them down anyway, but I separated them into 2 stacks. Financial evidence and personal evidence. Financial evidence was the backbone. Personal evidence, photos, messages, small trinkets, was supporting. If I ever went public, I would present the financial reality first. The personal stuff could underscore motive, but it might turn sympathetic eyes away if it felt like a gossip hunt. Marcus helped me translate bank jargon. Transfers labeled miscellaneous aren't proof, he said one night, leaning over my spreadsheet. But a string of matching transfers that line up with luxury receipts and hotel stays? That's a pattern. Patterns tell stories. He taught me to export statements into CSVs, to highlight outgoing transfers, to track where money landed. I learned how to annotate entries. Date, amount, destination, supporting receipt, witness if any. The big shock came when I found a recurring payment labeled in a way my mother must have thought was cryptic. It pointed to an account I didn't recognize. I called the bank on a pretext and asked general questions about how to get proof for a civil case. They were informative. "You'll need account holder authorization or a subpoena," the polite representative informed me. Good to know. Lawful channels only. I applied for emergency grants and additional scholarships. I picked up an extra shift at the law office where I'd interned the summer before. I sold a few things of mine online. Lena helped me set up a burner email where I could collect anonymous tips if they came from family members who feared confrontation. I never used that email to harass. Instead, it became a repository for documents that relatives beyond Aunt Linda quietly slid to me in the dark. I also started documenting conversations. Not in a way that would break the law, but in a way that an investigator would find useful. Dates, times, what was said, what tone was used. It's amazing how memory warps. The notebook kept me honest. There were nights I hated myself. I would lie in bed and imagine two outcomes. One where I exposed my mother and she vanished from our lives, and another where I held back and my resentment calcified until it devoured me. I pictured her bag packed for a secret weekend, fingers clasped in someone else's. I pictured my dad's narrowed eyes when he realized he'd been willfully blind. I pictured Michael, clueless, maybe angry, maybe sad. I walked the house one night and stood in front of my childhood photo album. There she was, Mom beaming at graduations at my prom, hands dusted in flour from some pie she'd made. Could that woman and the one funding chaos be the same? The easy answer is no, but human beings are layered. People make monstrous choices from fear, from loneliness, from the desperate belief that the next thrill will fill a hole. That didn't excuse her. Complicated my rage. I decided I could be strategic without becoming heartless. I could make her face consequences while steering clear of the personal degradation that would stain me. That balance, justice without cruelty, became my secret compass. The hardest part of implementing any plan like this is confronting people you love. My father's face was the one that shook me most. He had been gentle, clumsy, flawed, but always a sort of anchor. I sat across from him at his kitchen table, folder between us like an accusation I could no longer take back. "Dad," I said, voice steady though my hands were not. "I need you to look at this." He read. He blinked. He read more. I watched the color drain from his face. He asked one question that asked everything. "How long?" 10 years, I said. "At least." He folded his hands and, in a voice I hadn't heard since I was small, asked, "What do you want me to do?" That question was my moment of test. Did I want reconciliation or retribution? I chose both. I asked him to confront my mother, to insist on restitution, and to support my move for public accountability if she refused. To my surprise, he nodded slowly. He was ashamed. He had been complicit in his silence. He was ready, however haltingly, to try to make amends. That reaction shifted the entire plan. If Dad would stand with me, at least part of the family wall had a crack I could work through. But I also knew better than to trust that crack not to close. I had to be ready to go public if it didn't. The week after that meeting, I sat at my kitchen table, folder open, laptop on, phone charged. I had an attorney's appointment scheduled for Monday. I had Aaron penciled in for a verification meeting by midweek. I had Marcus on standby for any financial questions reporters might ask. I had Lena sleeping over sometimes so the house wouldn't be empty of a person who knew the whole truth. It was quiet, the kind of silence that tastes like a held breath. I'd done everything a person could do to build an edge for the moment of truth. The next step was the hardest. Pull and see what the rope unravels. That night I made a list and underlined one word. The next morning I texted Dad, "Tonight, 7 p.m. family meeting. Bring nothing. Bring the truth." My thumb hovered over send and then pressed. The message left my screen and my stomach dropped. There was no turning back. I had rehearsed the night in my head so many times I could have recited it in my sleep. The words I'd use, when to place the folder on the table, how to keep my voice steady if Dad started to cry or Mom tried to charm her way out. But rehearsals are only maps. They never quite capture the real terrain. The real thing was louder, messier, and somehow both less and more satisfying than I'd imagined. The house smelled like roasted garlic the evening of the meeting. Mom had made a casserole, the kind she always made when she wanted everything to feel normal. She set the table like it had always been. Linen, the good plates, the candles she only used for holidays. Small touches were her weapon. They were her best defense. performance, charm, apology without accountability. Dad arrived first, face pale and unsteady. He sat down and for the first time since I was a child didn't reach for the remote. He looked like a man who had just read the map of his life and discovered a long section labeled unknown. Michael came in last, a tight jaw and awkward grin that didn't reach his eyes. He kept glancing at me, then at the folder under my arm as if he were trying to guess whether it was a prank. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table and mouthed, "Ready?" I nodded. I placed the folder on the table between the salad bowl and the bread basket like it was the only thing that belonged there. "Dad," I said, "I asked you to come tonight because this can't be your secret to bear. We need honesty." He inhaled and there it was, the kind of breath that signals surrender. He pushed his chair back. "Mary, I don't know what to," he started. "Then read," I said. He opened the folder like you open a book you didn't want to begin. Receipts, bank statements, a photo of Mom in a dress that was not for charity events, kisses in a hotel lobby. Dates lined up with transfers lined up with purchases. For a minute the only sounds were the clinks of silverware left unattended and the shallow breathing of a woman who had been pretending for years. "It's not what it looks like," Mom said. Her voice had that practiced peel, wounded but immediately corrective. "I can explain." "Explain that you lied to me?" I answered and I watched as her script faltered. The practiced smile froze and slid off her face. This was not a stage she could salvage with a cough and a quicker story. This folder was a stage she had never designed. Dad looked up from the papers, eyes rimmed red. "I thought she was saving for Mary," he said simply. The confession felt like a confession of cowardice rather than sin. I didn't want to pry. I thought it was her way of handling things. "And you did nothing?" I asked. "You let her take my future? You let her spin a lie for a decade?" He flinched. The dinner table had shifted, not a place of nourishment but a tribunal. Michael, who had sat silent the entire time, stood up then. He was angry in a way I had never seen him. The indignation of someone who realizes they've been the beneficiary of theft. "You could have told me," he said to our mother, voice cracking. "You could have asked me to be honest. Instead you pretended and took things from me." Mom's lips moved. "I thought I was protecting you all. I thought," she broke off. Her eyes darted to the hallway and then to the living room where the old camcorder, a relic from birthdays past, sat on the shelf like a silent witness. I had not put that camcorder there by accident. A year earlier I had bought a digital voice recorder and a tiny wireless camera because I'd learned the hard way that people's memories change when they're confronted. But even without those devices, evidence was enough. I'd built a timeline so sharp it cut straight through denial. That night the meeting collapsed into fragments of sound. Dad left the table and went to sit alone on the porch. Michael stormed out and slammed the door behind him. Mom sank into her chair and stared at the folder like someone looking at an X-ray of their life and not recognizing the bones. She begged, then pleaded, then tried to bargain. "I'll pay it back," she promised. "I'll fix this. We can sell the house, we can." Her words were attempts to buy what she had already sold. I listened to all of it not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I needed to hear how she planned to repair what she had broken. Many people imagine revenge as pyrotechnics. For me, it was paperwork, negotiations, and a long patience that would not let itself be fooled by a single apology. 2 days after the family implosion, I did something most people wouldn't expect. I met with Mom. It was not a chapel of contrition conversation. I sat across from her in the kitchen with a legal pad and a list. "You're going to sign a notarized statement," I said. "You're going to admit to what you did in writing, and you're going to agree to mediation to return what's been taken. If you refuse, I will file a civil claim. I'll go to the press. I'll..." Her face went white. She tried to interrupt, to cry, to reach for my hands. She begged me not to make it public because it would ruin the family. But she had already ruined the family. The world outside my house was about to know it, and I was prepared to make sure the facts were not distorted by pity or by, "Oh, she was lonely," narratives. She chose not to sign. The refusal was a relief in a dark way. If Mom had capitulated, she might have gotten reconciliation without accountability. Refusal set the next stage in motion. When a private solution wasn't possible, you escalate. Carefully. I had Aaron, the journalist, waiting. I had my attorney, a woman named Carla I'd found through a legal clinic, who specialized in family civil matters. She was sharp, efficient, and she didn't waste empathy on stories that couldn't stand up in court. Erin wanted more corroboration. She verified the hotel receipts, called the concierge desk, which confirmed a name and a credit card ending in the last 4 digits that matched one of Mom's credit cards, and found a florist billing account that had been paid repeatedly. Proof stacked up like currency. Public exposure was a scalpel when wielded precisely. It would not be the messy bloodbath I feared. It would be a precise, documented strip of facts, anchored by receipts and corroborated by witnesses. The article published on a Tuesday with the headline, "Local woman allegedly diverted family savings to secret account," Affair reported. It wasn't an attack so much as an announcement. The town read it over their breakfasts and the reaction was immediate. At first there was denial in the neighborhood. A few phone calls from people who claimed they couldn't believe she'd do such a thing. Then came the quieter judgments. My mother's phone started ringing like a distant bell. Not consolations but questions and accusations. The PTA group messages lit up. The parish secretary asked for a private meeting. Her employer, a conservative company that profoundly valued image and family, announced an internal review. Mom came to me the day the article dropped with mascara tracks on her face. She begged me to remove the article to let her fix it quietly. I told her no. My voice was steady. "You promised me a future, Mom. You stole from me. This isn't about humiliation, it's about being made whole." I said the words I had practiced. Restitution, legal remedy, a public acknowledgement. Her husband, my father, did something I hadn't expected. He called an old family friend, a pastor, and together they asked Mom to step down from community volunteering until things cleared. The pastor's voice was soft but firm. Accountability is a part of repentance. Mom's face was pinched in a way that finally looked like regret rather than performance. But the story wasn't just about a mother and a stolen fund. It was about the man who had been on the receiving end of that theft. He had a name on the receipts and the town had been whispering about him for months. I won't call him by his real name here because some things don't need to be amplified, but he was a local businessman, polished, married, and the kind of man who wore a suit like armor. He tried to bargain. His lawyer called at midnight with the kind of cold tone you hear when someone imagines buying silence will fix a moral wound. "We can make a donation," the lawyer offered. "We're prepared to compensate Ms. Adams if she will keep this private." The offer smelled like breath from an empty mouth. It implied malleability. It tried to convert accountability into a transaction. I told the lawyer through Carla that we would not be bought. Privately, I wanted to be paid off. My tuition was not a riddle. But I could not allow the man's wealth to buy silence about how he enabled my mother's betrayal. Taking his money without exposing his behavior would have meant collusion. I would not be part of a cover-up. He doubled down. The press piece pushed his company to launch an internal review. Clients canceled contracts. His marriage cracked under the strain when his wife received anonymous receipts, copies of transaction statements I provided, not to shame her, but to make sure the truth was known in the family that had been hurt by him too. She confronted him. He left town for a while. His reputation, once a kind of local currency, was now worthless in the eyes of those who mattered most. There was also a calculated move I pulled, orchestrated in a way that made the consequences feel intimate rather than theatrical. My mother loved community events. The church bake sale, the fundraising gala, the garden club. Her social image was her currency. I asked Erin to withhold the full article until Saturday. That Saturday the town hosted its annual harvest luncheon, a cozy affair held in the church hall where my mother sat on the planning committee. I knew the exact guest list. I knew who would be there. I knew, because I'd put the pieces in motion, that a small printed packet of facts would arrive on the organizer's desk in the form of a well-documented handout. Erin agreed to let me place a modest folder in the centerpieces. Nothing salacious, only facts, dates, receipts, transfers, the timeline. When the luncheon began and the plaques of truth were discovered, the room shifted. The women who had always smiled at her suddenly had something else in their hands. Incontrovertible evidence. The hush that followed wasn't vindictive. It was the sound of people recognizing their own part in enabling silence. My mother sat very still as the plate of pot roast slid across her lap. Someone asked for a prayer for the family. I sat at the back and let the hush unfold. That afternoon not everyone repudiated her, but many did. The luncheon was small, but reputations travel. like scent in a closed room, and by evening half the neighborhood had heard. Someone posted a careful summary to the community forum. It was factual and gentle, and devastating. Michael's fall from casual privilege was less theatrical but arguably more effective. He lost friends. Invitations dwindled. People never told him directly he had been complicit, but their silence branded him until he no longer fit in the orbit he once inhabited. He did something few expected. He took responsibility. Not perfectly. Not without stumbles. But he worked 2 jobs and sold the new car and used the money to help with the restitution plan we drafted. He started to speak honestly about entitlement at community meetings. I watched him give speeches about responsibility with a voice not yet steady but intent. His transformation was its own kind of revenge. Not mine but life's. The legal path was slow and clinical. Depositions are not dramatic fireworks. They are fluorescent-lit rooms where truths are teased out until someone's story no longer holds. Mom's lawyer argued that the money had been given to Michael as part of the family's support. I argued, with Carla's guidance, that funds explicitly described as Mary's college fund had been diverted intentionally. We showed the bank records, the matching receipts, the correspondence. We subpoenaed the small hotel's records. The pattern was a net. There are moments in depositions that feel like the last bead on a string. A bank teller's memory of an odd transfer, a florist who recognized a recurring delivery, the concierge who remembered my mother, and a gentleman from out of town. Those small confirmations built the case. We settled. It was pragmatic and clean. Restitution to me for tuition, a public statement from my mother acknowledging her wrongdoing, and a mediation component where she and my father would both receive counseling. The court docket closed with a quiet thump. I paid my enrollment fee the next day. Sitting in the bursar's office while the transaction cleared felt like the end of a long tunnel. But consequences do not tidy themselves up when the paperwork ends. They reverberate. The fallout had human costs I hadn't fully anticipated. Mom lost friends, yes, but she also lost work. Her employer, under pressure and fearing brand damage, terminated her position. There was no crowning moment of triumph for me when that happened. It was simply a factual consequence. She called me the day she was let go and said, "Mary, what did I do?" Her voice was a hollow echo. I answered briefly, "You chose." Then I left the phone on the counter and walked away. My father began attending therapy in earnest. He joined a support group for men who had been complicit in various ways in family harms. He volunteered at the hardware store and stopped avoiding the neighborhood. Some parts of his life were salvageable and he tried to salvage them. My brother, in his halting way, started to repay, to work, to shrink into someone who could possibly be trusted again. He came to my first recital of moot court and clapped so loud my ears rang. And the man, the businessman who had received both my mother's affections and her money, moved away. I received a brief email from his attorney offering an apology for the public spectacle. I did not respond. Karma had a way of doing its own work. Clients left, contracts expired, and he had to rebuild in a market where trust was the commodity he no longer had. But there was one last twist I had arranged that still makes me smirk when I think about it. Mom had always prided herself on the idea that she was morally superior in public. The woman who baked for bake sales and taught Sunday school. I wanted to expose that made-for-television persona, but I also wanted a small, private victory to remind her what she'd lost. A former PTA friend, someone I had quietly told the truth to weeks earlier, invited Mom to a friendship tea at a local home. She accepted, thinking it was safe. The hostess was gentle and calm, and the room full of familiar faces made Mom relax. Midway through dessert, a delicate lemon tart, the hostess read a short letter. It was not a shout. It was not mean. It was a quiet reading of a few lines from a community member who had suffered financially from the ripple effects of financial negligence and who now wanted to emphasize accountability and compassion. The letter was kind, but the subtext was unmistakable. We see you and we expect more. Mom's hand tightened around her teacup. She looked at the faces around her and finally felt the full weight of social consequence. It was not melodramatic. It was instead the slow sinking feeling that the scaffolding she had used to hold up her image had been taken away. By the end of that autumn, the town had settled into a new equilibrium. Some people forgave, some didn't. We stopped receiving casserole drop-offs. I moved into an apartment and enrolled in classes. Each time I opened my email to find a message from a scholarship board or a professor welcoming me, I felt the strange alchemy of damage turned into opportunity. Revenge, as I discovered, is not a single act. It is a series of decisions that add up. It's the patience to collect receipts, the courage to face a family at a table, the willingness to go public when private remedies fail. It's also a long accounting of human costs. There was a night in December after the settlement check cleared and the last community meeting had dwindled, when I stood in the backyard and looked up at the sky. The stars were cold and pinprick distant. I felt tired, not triumphant, not cruel, not vindictive. Just tired and ready in a way I hadn't been before. There is one thing I will never tell my mother. I did not set out to destroy her life. I set out to recover my future, to force accountability, and to stop a pattern of theft and deceit that could have destroyed others. The rest was consequence. The house I had grown up in felt quieter now, as if secrets had finally left the rooms they had been hiding in. That quiet was its own kind of warning and relief. When the dust finally settled, I remember sitting in my tiny apartment, surrounded by stacks of textbooks, ramen cups, and second-hand furniture, and realizing I had something my mother never would. Peace. It didn't look glamorous. My apartment wasn't big. My car made a weird sound every time I turned the ignition. I was still juggling 2 part-time jobs. But every piece of it was mine. Hard-earned. Untainted. Honest. And honestly, that felt better than anything money could have bought. Dad eventually filed for divorce. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't even loud. It was just inevitable. Years of lies had corroded their marriage, and once the truth was out, there was nothing left to patch. He started gardening. Bought himself a small place near the river. And for the first time in years I saw him smile without forcing it. Michael, my brother, slowly rebuilt himself. It wasn't easy. People whispered, people judged, people assumed he had been complicit. But he worked. He earned. He showed up. And over time people saw the difference. He and I, we weren't exactly close, but for the first time we were equals. As for Mom, she lost everything she valued. The affair ended the moment her boyfriend realized the money flow had stopped. The community she lived for, the reputation she adored, gone. Her friends stopped calling, the invitations dried up. Even church pews seemed to shift when she walked in. And the worst part for her? She couldn't spin it anymore. No one believed her. About a year later I ran into her at the grocery store. She looked older, not just aged but tired. Her hair was thinner, her eyes duller, her posture bent like the weight of everything finally caught up with her. She saw me and froze. For a moment I thought she'd walk away. But she didn't. "Mary," she whispered. I didn't yell. I didn't scold. I just looked at her and said, "I hope you're getting the help you need." Then I walked away. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't revenge. It was truth. Because I had already taken everything I needed from the situation. The lesson, the justice, the closure. People often ask me, do I regret it? Do I regret exposing her, dragging everything into the light, destroying her carefully built image? And the answer is no. Because silence would have been worse. Silence would have meant complicity. Silence would have meant letting her rob me and others of the truth. Yes, it was messy. Yes, it broke my family. Yes, it hurt in ways I'll never fully describe. But it also gave me my future back. And it taught me something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Small Blue Diamond loyalty is earned, not owed. Small Blue Diamond family doesn't excuse betrayal. Small Blue Diamond, and sometimes, the only way to heal, is to burn the lie to the ground. If you're watching this, maybe you felt betrayal too. Maybe someone lied to you, used you, stole from you, or made you feel invisible. And maybe you've wondered if you should just keep quiet, just swallow the pain to keep the peace. But here's the truth I learned. Peace built on lies isn't peace at all. It's just silence. And silence only protects the liar. So don't be afraid to stand up. Don't be afraid to expose the truth. Don't be afraid to take your life back, even if it means walking through fire first. Because sometimes when the smoke clears, you'll find freedom waiting on the other side. That's my story. That's how my mother's betrayal shattered everything, and how I turned that betrayal into a future she never thought I'd have. So if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And remember, you're stronger than the lies they tell you. Speech balloon, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my shoes? Thumbs up, hit like if you believe betrayal should never go unpunished. Bell, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of betrayal, revenge, and the lessons that change everything. Because trust me, I've got plenty more where this came from.